So I'm the youngest exec, or I think at Microsoft. I'm running this corporate strategy team, and after I did the Facebook investment, Silicon Valley realized that I could get deals done, and so VCs started wanting to meet me and entrepreneurs and cut deals with Microsoft or sell their company to Microsoft or just have different conversations. And so that was like unintentionally, that platform of Microsoft really is what got me started as an angel investor. And the first deal I did was Square. Ron Conway, this amazing, famous angel investor in San Francisco, SV Angel, he had a group of guys, awesome guys, who invited me to a baseball game, and they would have these social events, and I sat down with Jack Dorsey. He had just left Twitter, and he was telling me about this new thing he was going to build in the payment space, and I knew a thing or two about it. I'd looked at it for Microsoft a little bit, and he let me invest. So I just cut him a check, made a deal with my boss at Microsoft that I wouldn't invest in anything competitive with anything we were doing. And I started investing, and first deal was Square.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Gilder Spotlight podcast. I'm super excited for today's guest. His name is Fritz Lanman, the CEO of ClassPass and Mindbody. But Fritz, I really appreciate you for coming on. I know how hectic your schedule is. So first off, I just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on the Spotlight podcast.
And hey, it's great to be here.
Awesome. And I just wanted to hop in there's a lot to unpack about your life, your career. You have a very unique career, but growing up back in your adolescence, did you have a mentor or role model that you looked up to?
I would say many different sort of folks that I was able to look up to. First, just I had good examples of my parents who were like high school sweethearts from the Midwest. And my dad was a doctor who had found his way to Silicon Valley. And, he was at Stanford in the 70s. Like, as he always jokes, he became a doctor, probably was like the poorest guy in his class because everyone else went into tech, and even he took computer science, but still became a doctor for some reason. But he was had a super cool career in medicine, and then became an entrepreneur. And when I was in high school with 5 kids, so anybody who tells you that you can't become a founder later in life, there are counterexamples to that. So yeah, he was definitely one. I would say John Warnock, who was the founder of Adobe, who recently passed away, actually he's my brother's godfather, one of my brother's godfathers, and my parents' kind of best friend, him and his wife. And they're remarkable people. And, he built Adobe from scratch after working at Xerox PARC. And he sort of first helped expose me to computers, but, different friends who were involved with Apple Computer, and obviously seeing Adobe as a kid kind of get built by this really close family friend. So I'd say my dad, John Warnock, and then various athletic inspirations back in the day. My first occupational goal was to be in the NBA, but that didn't quite work out. So here we are.
Well, I'm assuming that Michael Jordan was probably the main star when you were growing up. Did you look up to Michael Jordan, or who were kind of like the key players?
I'm glad you didn't go to like, Dr. J or someone earlier, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Thank you for that. Yeah, MJ was the guy. And my parents being from Chicago, I was a big Bulls fan. I was also a Warriors fan. I grew up in the Bay Area. It was the kind of Timmy Hardaway, Chris Mullin era, followed by the Latrell Sprewell, Chris Webber era. And it was a tough time to be a Warriors fan for the first, 30 years of my life. But yeah, there was nothing like watching Michael Jordan play basketball.
And just curious, Fritz, were you the oldest of 5 brothers as well? Or are you the oldest of?
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the first one in the line.
I see. And what was the kind of like being the oldest brother, having 4 other brothers growing up in the Bay Area?
It was, well, my parents had us in phases of two effectively, and then the baby, they would never admit to being a mistake, but he was the only one who wasn't paired up. So it was me and my brother James, 2 years apart. That was like we were born when dad was still a resident to be a doctor, and had no money and lived in San Francisco, and then moved down to the peninsula, and then my brothers Max and then Connor, who were over I think 2.5 years apart. So Connor the fourth is about 10 years younger than me. And then 5 years after that, we had a baby. We had a baby at Lammy, and so he's 15 years younger than me, and yeah, same parents, and it was it was a lot of fun. It was a good parental strategy by my folks because they could just kind of amortize the cost of child rearing onto
Right.
me and my second brother James, who I feel like kind of helped out a lot. They probably think I over exaggerated, but I swear I changed thousands of
Hmm.
diapers,
Right.
by
Right.
the time I was 21. So yeah, it was super fun. It was super chaotic, but taught me a lot about going with the flow. I used to do my math homework with brothers like wrestling,
Hmm.
on my back, literally. So it was a different environment than a lot of my roommates when I went to college for.
Was there kind of like a competitive camaraderie with all brothers, or since you're the oldest one, were you kind of the leader, and had kind of that big brother vibe, so to speak?
By the way, Tyga, I don't know if it's just my connection, but you're
Hmm.
kind of blurry. So
Oh,
hopefully your recordings actually get better than that.
yeah, yeah. The recording
But
it records locally, so it should be all good.
cool. Um, yeah, so we weren't really competitive with each other as brothers during our childhood because we were staggered in ages enough
Hmm.
that it was more just I always wanted my little brothers to do great things and surpass me in sports and stuff. I think once we got to be adults, there's definitely friendly rivalries where we look back and say, okay, who was the best baseball player, or even just a few months ago over Christmas break playing some pickup basketball. Um, I still kind of kicked their ass and pushed them around. But it was never really there wasn't a crazy amount of rivalry. It was we were all really supportive of each other.
Hmm.
Um, and truth be told, my brothers, did outshine me in some athletic dimensions. My third brother rode at Yale. My fifth brother played college quarterback there, and we were all good athletes and all worked hard in school, and we're all quite ambitious.
Hmm.
But it was mostly uh, we kind of operate more like a wolf pack. Collective success of the clan is what we're going for.
And I know that all your brother. I mean, I know Connor went to Stanford. You went to Yale. Your other brother, you said, played football at Yale. Did you end up playing basketball at Yale?
Sadly, I did not achieve that. It was actually one of the reasons I wanted to go to Yale was it was the worst D1 basketball team in the nation my senior year of high school. And the coach, I'd gotten in touch with the coach, and he's like, if you get in, let us know. There's no athletic scholarships in the Ivy Leagues. His name was Dick Kuchen, and I'd gotten in and was going to go and try out and everything. He got fired. James
Hmm.
Jones, who's still the coach now, 4 years later, came in. He brought several recruits who were way more athletic than I was, and I was gearing up to try to do it, but I dislocated my shoulder playing basketball there, trying to get ready to earn a spot on the team, and so I never got to play.
And after that injury, I know that maybe strategically you wanted to play, and then that injury kind of, you know, you weren't able to. How did you kind of shift your mindset from going from sports into academics?
Well, Yale, I mean, you don't go to Yale thinking even if you want to be an athlete. I think most of the athletes at Yale are aware that they're not going to play in the NBA, or well, we do occasionally get somebody to go to the NFL or play Major League Baseball, but for the most part, if you're going to Yale, it's because you have already reckoned with the fact that you're not going to be a pro athlete unless you play, I think, squash and sailing or some pretty world class sports there. There's a few hockey, but so I kind of went into it saying, hey, this is a pretty exceptional university. I should try to take advantage of it. and mostly just try to meet as many interesting people as I could. I was kind of a, you know, a bad surfer kid from California who was pretty smart, like did well in school, was pretty good at sports, but learning about prep school culture in New York, and it really gave me a global perspective being there. So that transition wasn't very hard. Kind of think what was interesting is once I hurt my shoulder and realized, even if it had been a long shot for me to make the team and to even be competitive, once that dream went out the window with the injuries, the I did pivot and said, okay, what else can I do that I wouldn't have been able to do if I was an athlete? And joined a fraternity, which was a ton of fun, and then studied abroad in Italy my junior year, which I never would have been able to do. Um, I took some fun jobs while I was there. Um, yeah, I've always been somebody who kind of tries to, play the hand that I'm dealt as best as I possibly can and not spend too much time worrying about, what cards I wasn't dealt.
I see.
But
And
it did change
just
my perspective and let me do some things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So yeah, ended up being a blessing in disguise.
amazing. You mentioned you studied abroad in Italy. What was your major and why did you decide Italy?
So I was a history major at Yale, which I did part of this sort of transformation of my attitude after not being able to play sports. And then I'd always been more of a math oriented person and was interested in kind of programming. But Yale had I looked at Yale and it's like famous for having this like incredible history department. And I was a pretty bad writer, didn't know much about history. And so I kind of leaned into it and then wanting to go to Italy. I couldn't do, math and Italian. Um, and there's a bunch of American universities that have programs. So went to Florence, Italy, which was incredible. Chose a program, Syracuse and Florence, not least of which because it's like the oldest American school there. It had this very famous Harvard professor like Rab Hatfield, who is like one of the most famous art historians, Michelangelo, and I was like, that'd be really cool. And then I read a review from a Yale student who had gone, and she said, don't go here because the academics aren't rigorous enough. It's too easy, and the kids party too much. And there's way too many women on this program. There's not enough men. And I'm like, I thought someone was pranking me when they wrote that review. I'm like, I got to get on this program. This sounds pretty good.
And did you
So
end
yeah,
up
so I
learn
went there and studied history and Italian and Italian and history and art history, and yeah, it ended up being, maybe one of the best academic experiences of my life.
and I was just doing some research into you and according to your Wikipedia, it says that you speak Italian and Spanish fluently. Did you end up going abroad and
Oof.
learning Italian fluently?
Well, that's the beauty of Wikipedia. Is it's I guess I don't know how the veracity of Wikipedia could be questioned. Um, I got pretty good at Spanish because I grew up in California. We started taking it in seventh grade. I had this amazing Spanish teacher in seventh and eighth grade. I think I learned more in seventh and eighth grade than I did in all of high school in Spanish, just because this one teacher, Sue Prescott, was so gifted and tough. And then Yale wanted you to have experience in the language of the country you went to. So I took some Italian at Yale, got there, and I got pretty good. I don't know if I'm business fluent. It's now been 25 years. Dopo di alcune birre posso parlare meglio, right? After a few drinks, I could definitely speak a little bit better. I'm
Right,
just
right,
a bit
right.
more loosened up. And it's fun usually it takes me a few days when I get back to Italy, or even if I go to a Spanish speaking country. Like I live in Montana. It's not like I'm using Spanish or certainly Italian that frequently. But after a few days, I can kind of pick it up again. And all that's missing for me, for the most part, in both languages, is just my vocabulary isn't quite as extensive as it used to be. So uh, hopefully soon I'll be able to get my Neuralink chip, inserted, and that
Right,
will
right, right.
obviate the need for me to remember all those words.
Amazing. And just to kind of segue into kind of the start of your career, what inspired you originally to get into technology?
I needed a damn job.
Mhm.
I'm only half joking. I was always into tech. Like I said, I grew up around it. Friends, dad's working at Apple Computer, and my dad was a gamer and had done some programming. And then this great family friend started Adobe Systems, which is one of the biggest software companies in the world, and kind of unlocked the desktop computing revolution. So from a young age, by sheer happenstance, I was lucky to be in an environment that saw the impact that kind of cutting edge technology was having on the economy. And
Hmm.
in Silicon Valley, we had computers probably 10 years before most kids had ever even seen one, even in our schools. So I was very interested in tech. When I graduated, the economy was pretty bad. It was after the dot-com crash. So the
Hmm.
investment banks and consulting firms weren't hiring very much. And Microsoft came to Yale and did on-campus recruiting. And I'd kind of assumed I'd head back to Silicon Valley and figure out a job. And who knows? I mean, maybe I would have ended up at Google or something. That would have been not bad. But Steve Ballmer had
Microsoft's
just
not
taken
not
over
a
for
bad option.
Gates. Yeah, yeah, and especially back then, Microsoft was like what kind of like what Microsoft plus Google plus Facebook is today. It's like an Apple. It was like the one, they called it the evil empire. It was like this huge company kind of in every space. And then there was like small companies like smaller like Adobe or Lotus or um Claris, like other businesses, Siebel, like there was software businesses that had made the founders, very wealthy and were interesting, but nothing like today where you have this kind of multipolar world of enormous software companies. So I got the job um, in product management, and Steve Ballmer had just taken over for Gates, the CEO, maybe a year or two before. He had invested heavily in entry level, like I was in the inaugural class of this program of product managers, and they sent us to Kellogg at Northwestern and brought professors out to train us, and it was awesome. And those other 35 kids that I was in that program with are still really good friends. We're on WhatsApp chains. Many have become great entrepreneurs or leaders of different industries and companies and stuff. So, um, yeah, I got lucky. I did need a job because I was not a kid whose parents were going to finance his lifestyle, after college. So, but I was like, technology, biggest software company in the world. I'll learn how to, build software and cut my teeth and thought I'd be there for just a few years. And it ended up staying for almost a decade, I think 8.5, 9 years, because I had just great opportunities there. I kind of proved myself. I was hungry and I evolved from product management into corporate strategy, which was a super, super fun place to be, a company with 18 different billion-dollar revenue businesses, a company that was going through interesting disruption threats from the rise of Google and ad-funded software, the migration and emergence of the cloud, kind of running a corporate strategy team. I got to interface with the most senior executives and work on super interesting projects. And my claim to fame was convincing the leaders to put $250 million into Facebook. So that was pretty fun.
And I know that happened around 2000. So that was around your fourth year into your career. How were you able to move up the ladder and get that kind of social cloud at Microsoft so fast? They kind of look at that class of 32 of you guys that they sent you to Kellogg as like, these are going to be the top tier employees that we're going to have, leaders in the next, 5, 10 years. Like,
There definitely was a tailwind from having been selected into that program. And I think the other half, a third was probably from the program, a third was luck, and a third was me busting my ass and trying to follow the Steve Martin "be so good they can't ignore you"
mm-hmm,
advice. I kind of finished at the top of the class, with a few others. Like I did some projects that put my name on the radar at senior levels of the company, and one leader in particular ran Microsoft's internet business internationally, a woman named Judy Gibbons. And I connected to her and asked her advice. I was actually looking at a job at Google to leave Microsoft. And she had hired a team out of McKinsey to start an internet strategy team. And she said, look, go to Google or stay here, come work for me or for this team. And you can move to London and work on internet strategy projects. So me and another kind of guy who became a pretty big name, an investor in tech, is Charlie Songhurst. I went to work for Charlie, and Krista Davies. She's the CFO of Aon, and now, and Charlie and Krista started this team and hired Charlie's roommate from Oxford, Chloe Ross. She was my first boss. She now works for me. And I went out to London and got to live in London and commute to Seattle kind of as needed. And we got to work on big projects. And yeah, one of the values of my company today is be so good they can't ignore you, which is Steve Martin's advice for aspiring comedians. And that was kind of what we did. We wrote some papers, we did some projects that really caught the attention of Gates and Ballmer and the senior leadership of Microsoft. And they said, hey, uh, these young leaders are putting out some really interesting work products, interesting perspectives, interesting recommendations, and they just kept giving us more and more remit and responsibility.
And just curious, how did you know that? I know you're leading the deal team in order to invest that $250 million into Facebook. How did you know Facebook was the social media platform of, the next 10, 20 years?
I mean, we didn't. I was overconfident, I guess, in my assertion that it was going to be the winner. But part of it, I think, was I had studied the space intimately. I'd looked at lots of different players, and I just felt I could feel in the kind of the product and observing within my own social graphs what was happening. And that was an advantage I had as being a young person, right? Being one of the youngest directors at Microsoft, if not the youngest. Well, I had little brothers who were in college at Yale, which was like the second or third school after Harvard using Facebook. And then I had a brother who was still in high school. So I saw it kind of go through the colleges and then go into the high schools, and people my age were using MySpace at the time, and people in England were using Bebo. And so I did like my homework. I did like feature assessments and comparisons. I looked at the quality of the infrastructure engineering. That's what ultimately killed MySpace. It was just really poorly built. Couldn't handle the scale. It would take 10, 20 seconds to load a page sometimes with photos on it. And so it was definitely not guaranteed that Facebook was going to win, but I think they hit kind of escape velocity. I think their competitors just didn't have the right product and or tech infrastructure. And we didn't know at the time we did the investment exactly where it was going to go, but I remember I gave my boss, the CFO, Chris Liddell and Ballmer, I said, there's kind of three scenarios, and Kevin Johnson, who was the president. I was like, there's a scenario where this becomes a $100 billion company. There's a scenario where it's a $10 billion company, and there's a scenario where it's 500 to a billion or something like that. And I tried to just articulate each and said, assign a probability to those. And if you assigned any probability to it, being a 100 or $200 billion company, then you could start to underwrite a significant investment in it. And it was also like the enemy of the enemy is my friend thing too, right? Like there was a world where Facebook was going to cozy up to Google, and we kind of, with that investment, brought them into the Microsoft ad ecosystem and partnership ecosystem. Not dissimilar to what Satya has done with OpenAI, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot. There was like strategic rationale, financial rationale, and a hell of a lot of just gut instinct and meeting the players and studying the product. And I wrote a paper about it, and had brilliant people like Ray Ozzie challenging me, and Gates himself, and ultimately it was a social product. So I was never going to be able to beat Ray Ozzie or Gates on an engineering argument, although I think they respected some of the infrastructure analyses and assertions I made. But when it came to the social dynamics of young people, it helped that I was a 26-year-old or 25-year-old trying to interpolate what this thing meant for a bunch of 40-somethings and 50-somethings.
Wow. And after that, that's when you kind of got the opportunity to go over to London and kind of live partially in London and partially in Seattle.
No, actually, I did the Facebook thing, and I was doing strategy from London. So
okay, I see.
I was a product manager for 2 years during this undergrad program, leadership program that I had enrolled in. That was a 2-year program. And it was at the end of the 2 years, that's when I got the opportunity to switch to strategy and either stay in Seattle or go to London. And I went to London.
I see. And how'd you like London?
It was amazing. It's funny because there's a big difference in cities when you just visit versus when you live there. And I had visited when I had studied abroad in Italy and didn't really like London. It was like rainy. I was in like Leicester Square to try to go to a pub and it kind of sucked. When I moved there, though, you realize, oh man, the complexion of the city changes. There's all these high streets. You never go to like, be like going to Times Square in New York, right? Leicester Square. Like nobody who lives there is ever there. And I developed relationships that I've carried with me for a lifetime. I mean, my boss there, she now runs international for us at Mindbody and ClassPass. My my peer, Tom Aveston, he became my CFO now for Mindbody and ClassPass. My CMO at Mindbody and ClassPass was on our team, but based out of the US. So in Seattle, um, Zach Apter. So, we were a young group doing really cool and interesting work for a humongous company. Some of us got to live in London while doing that. And I loved it. I just, even just taking the bus to work every day was an adventure, living in a foreign country. So I always tell everyone, study abroad, live abroad. The thing I think the Brits have that better than we do is this notion of the gap year. Like after high school, take a gap year before university, after university before the job, before you start a job if you can afford it. And everyone in America is in such a hurry to get through high school and college
Hmm.
and get into a job. And that's a big mistake. I think it's really hard to take a year off once you start your career, but it's not hard to just give yourself the opportunity, especially before college.
Right.
I would have loved to
There's
have
no
been
rush.
1 year older during college. Yeah.
And also, just living in London, you pretty much get all of Europe at your doorstep. So, did you do any kind of weekend trips to any particular places, or do you have any
But yeah,
favorite spots in Europe? Or
totally. Yeah. I mean, the sad part about the great thing about London's proximity to Europe. Sad thing is, I almost didn't see anything outside of zone 1 and 2 in London because if I left, I was going to Paris or to Italy or to Spain or to Germany or Sweden or the Netherlands. I was on the road a ton, and not just in Europe. I mean, in your 20s, you're it was basically study abroad with money for me because I had this pretty sweet job at Microsoft. So I was able to go to the rugby sevens in Hong Kong and go on annual trips to Thailand to the beaches and full moon parties. And I tried to see as much of the world, knowing that that was a limited window that I was going to have where I was single and didn't have kids and had a flexible location job back when that was not very normal. Man, I went all over the place. And for work, I got to travel to Asia a ton, to Japan. We were looking at buying Yahoo, and I got to lead the evaluation of the Chinese and Japanese assets that Yahoo had. So I got trips out there. So it
amazing.
was great, man. My twenties were a gift for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine like a better opportunity than making the kind of money at Microsoft and having pretty much the whole world at your fingertips to be able to go to Thailand or Japan or all over. So I myself, I love working remote, traveling abroad as well. But just more about you, Fritz. Want to kind of get into your investment career. I know that you have a super successful investing career from like Wish to all sorts of different, big name companies. How did you transition? Because I'm assuming as well, when you're leading the deal team at Microsoft, you're also working at Microsoft at the same time, like being an angel investor. But did you fully transition into becoming an angel investor? Or how did you kind of balance the two?
No, it was kind of an accident. So I'm the youngest exec, or I think at Microsoft. I'm running this corporate strategy team, and after I did the Facebook investment, Silicon Valley realized that I could get deals done. And so VCs started wanting to meet me and entrepreneurs and cut deals with Microsoft or sell their company to Microsoft or just have different conversations. And so that was like unintentionally that platform of Microsoft really is what got me started as an angel investor. And the first deal I did was Square. Ron Conway, this amazing, famous angel investor in San Francisco, the Angel, he had a group of guys, awesome guys, who invited me to a baseball game, and they would have these social events. And I sat down with Jack Dorsey. He had just left Twitter, and he was telling me about this new thing he was going to build in the payment space. And I knew a thing or two about it. I'd looked at it for Microsoft a little bit, And he let me invest. So I just cut him a check, made a deal with my boss at Microsoft that, I wouldn't invest in anything competitive with anything we were doing. And I started investing, and first deal was Square, third deal was Pinterest, fifth deal was Wish, all of which IPO'd. And I probably got overconfident in my own abilities, and I just kept writing checks. And I actually left Microsoft at that point. So angel investing made me realize, like, wow, I've been here for almost 10 years. I didn't want to just be a big company guy. And it made me envious, getting to watch these entrepreneurs build stuff and move fast and have just such huge impact over the world and what they were doing. And I wanted to try that. So I talked to my boss and left the company, and he was great. He's, CFO. He's like, you can always come back if it doesn't work out. Good luck. And a bunch of senior execs gave me some money, and angels gave me some money, and I started my first business. And then one of my mentors and advisors and kind of career sponsors at Microsoft, Hank Vigil, um, who was I think he was the first product manager for Excel in the 80s, and OG Microsoft, latter half of his career, kind of the senior deal rainmaker. I'd done the Facebook thing with Hank, and great guy. Well, he called me and said, "Hey, I'm gonna kind of move into my next career after Microsoft and start angel investing, and I've got more capital than you, and you've got some interesting deal flow. Let's team up." So I left. I started building a company, and then Hank and I started a Sakia Capital together and started writing checks. So our first check together was, I think, Pinterest, or maybe that was our second. And we had a great career where he kind of, was able to manage the day to day, and I was building companies and then investing on the side. And we didn't really know what we were doing. We just started investing and kind of quietly built one of the best track records in tech over the next couple of years.
And just curious, because I feel like being an investor is one of the, I don't want to say like safest routes, but you went from being like an angel investor to then being the CEO, or actually first being a founder of Doppler Labs and then being the CEO of ClassPass and Mindbody. So why did you transition from kind of like the safe world of investing in venture capital to the more risky world of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I've had an unusual path where, yeah, I was a Microsoft exec, became a angel investor, and then became an entrepreneur, but in quite rapid succession, I'd say. So I was still 28 or 9 when I left Microsoft, and I just wanted to build. And I knew if I became a professional VC and that's all I did, you start making a lot of money, you get used to that, you build a lifestyle around that, you start having kids, and then you're stuck. And I didn't want to have to do what my dad did, which is, come home when you've got, 5 college educations right on the horizon and have to go, and start a business and be on the road all the time. That was tough. So, yeah, I kind of said, look, I've built a good track record and brand at Microsoft. I can always come back to Microsoft. I've got this angel investing thing going. I've got a partner with a lot of capital who's a great, great guy. And so I got to kind of have my cake and eat it too, learn how to build startups. And I had some successes and also some failures in that, but I got kind of addicted to it. I built LiveStar, sold it to Pinterest. That was a great outcome, and then moved to New York City and started 3 companies, basically AirPods before AirPods existed, plus machine hearing capabilities. Download, which was a business I started with my wife, which was a no-code app creator business, effectively for bloggers and publishers, which Greylock eventually funded. And then that one didn't quite work. And long story over beer, but sold that to Dropbox. Doppler was almost a huge, huge one, but hardware is super expensive. So ended up being kind of a failure. We had to sell it to Dolby. And then the third was ClassPass. And that one I had just kind of helped the founders with their seed funding and incubated it, became their chairman, was advising on product and tech and how to run a company. And after about a year, my partner on that, I was the chairman of the 3 businesses. So I had a CEO on each. I was still angel investing with Hank. It was pretty exhausting. I left New York. We got pregnant with our first kid. So we moved to San Francisco, where I grew up. And just a few months after moving to SF, I got the call from Pyle, my partner at ClassPass. And she said, "Hey, I hate running. I don't like being the CEO. we've got some serious business model challenges here, and you've got a lot of money in the business, and I'd like you to run it. And I don't want to sort of trust a stranger. I trust you, Fritz, and let's switch jobs. So I'd sort of agreed to do it for a year, and that was December of 2015. And here I am coming up on 10 years later, having become a wellness tech operator, I guess.
Right. Well, I just looked at the Google Play Store and the App Store, and ClassPass is like number like 36 in the health and wellness with over 1 million plus downloads and like 200 plus reviews with like 4.7 stars, which I feel like for a lot of people I know, like the hardest industry or the hardest space to get into is the app space, just because people use only like 4 or 5 apps on their phone. How did you know people were going to start using ClassPass, and how did you capitalize on that?
Well, ClassPass was actually the result of 2 or 3 pivots and multiple years of experimentation by Pyle and her partners. And I got involved. It was still called Classtivity. It was the sort of predecessor, and it had been a listing site for different classes. And Pyle kind of realized that the genius was the pass model, like taking the friction out of going to different studios. And these studios had excess capacity that needed to be liquidated, right? We actually thought in the beginning we were just going to be a lead generation business. So we'd find people, we'd say, hey, go try a bunch of different places and then join one. And that is part of ClassPass, but a lot of people actually just want to maintain a permanent multi-studio membership or multi-gym membership. And so we saw people coming back over and over. So I didn't know, I knew that as a former attempted failed athlete who had fallen really out of shape, to me, the traditional gym is not the best way to work out. Like, it's the hardest thing to do, right? It's called working out. It's not funning out. It's working out. It's not fun. Like, and so the idea of like going and like running on a treadmill or convincing yourself to lift weights and having no real accountability, I needed that team dynamic. I needed that instructor dynamic. I needed good music. I needed good equipment. I need everything possible to make it fun or more fun, right? The idea of going on and just running on a treadmill for an hour, man, that's the worst thing we could possibly sell to people as what they need to do to be healthy, because nobody wants to do that unless you're a psycho. And there are 10 million psychos in America who actually enjoy that. But that's the exception, not the rule. Most of us want something closer to what is team sports. And group fitness is, to me, the closest thing to team sports that there is in the kind of health and wellness world. And it worked. I lost 80 pounds using the product, or 70 pounds myself. So I knew there was something really big behind this group fitness trend. CrossFit was emerging. SoulCycle had emerged. I was bullish on health and wellness as a macro theme for the next 50 years. It's like health and wellness, people focusing on health and wellness, and AI, and like climate change being a big problem. Like, those are the 3 things that I would say are like defining macro trends for the next 50 years. And I believe that 10 years ago, and I believe that for another 40 years. And I saw that these places had a lot of excess capacity that needed to be filled. It's incredibly fragmented. And so it made sense for there to be an aggregator in the space.
Yeah, I know. I love what you guys are doing at ClassPass. And it's amazing, how big it's gotten. I'm curious into your story. I kind of already talked to you about it, but just for our listeners, your strategy behind moving to Missoula, Montana and bringing a ClassPass office here.
Yeah. So after I started running ClassPass, I changed the business model. It's a recurring subscription. I kind of created this credit system. So now you get points, you get to spend the points each month. And that really worked. And so we scaled it to almost 30 countries around the world, thousands of cities. And one of my board members was the chairman of Booking Group, Bob Mylod, genius guy, had been the CFO of Priceline, done incredibly well. And he said, Fritz, you can't run this company in New York and SF, the 2 most expensive cities in the world. Like, at some point, the world's going to care about profitability, and you should find a cheaper market. You should come to Detroit. And my executive team was not that excited about Detroit. And as a health and kind of wellness and active lifestyle company, I said, I'd been a fly fishing and rafting guide in Vail during a college summer. Maybe we can do something in the Rockies. So both East Coast and West have to get on a plane. And how cool, this is before remote work was a thing, how cool would it be to be able to tell somebody you can live in New York, the Bay Area, or in the Rockies, right? And you can kind of, if you want to change over a weekend, you can move and be in a new office location, or you could do every 3 months, you can move, whatever. I thought it was such a cool competitive advantage. Well, Colorado was overrun and really expensive, and I'd started hanging out in Montana because of the fly fishing and awesome local hill skiing, which I prefer to the mega resort skiing. And here we are. I'm sitting here. I'm like Boulder 25 years ago is kind of what Missoula was like now 7 years ago. And it's unfortunately kind of on the same trajectory as Boulder, but it was cheaper, awesomer. And, so had a university. And so we opened an office originally thinking, maybe it'll be sales, maybe some CX. And then my CTO was from Missoula and decided to come join us and move here. And we started hiring software engineers here. And so eventually I bought a house and fell in love with it. And I'm like, my wife and I were like, hey, let's try it. And now my CMO, my CTO, me, our VP of sales, like we have a lot of executive presence here, and it became our biggest office in our headquarters. The pandemic kind of changed everything because now we're a remote friendly company since we're distributed anyway. We then merged with Mindbody, which was based in San Luis Obispo, but also had big presence in New York and Scottsdale and Atlanta. So we're a distributed company, but it was pretty cool to be able to build this company from Missoula
Yeah, I
and bring
love
lots
it.
of jobs here.
And being from Missoula, I want to thank you just because I feel like around the time you brought ClassPass over, the entire city is just becoming a really fun city with cool bars, cool restaurants, and it's an amazing, awesome, fun place to be. So I really want to thank you for kind of bringing
It's
that
terrible,
cool
Tyga. It's terrible. Go to Colorado. Tell everyone who
Yeah,
listens it's better in Colorado.
yeah, go back to Colorado. But Fritz, I really appreciate your time. Just one last thing. Do you have any advice to future entrepreneurs, future founders, future CEOs getting into the business, or any kind of misconceptions or surprises about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of advice and thoughts. I think the first is just how I always tell entrepreneurs don't do it, and don't do it if you can avoid it, because you can never you will never understand how hard it truly is to build these companies. And then I would also, so the people who do it, who should do it, are the ones who can't help themselves otherwise. They need to build, they need to try it. The other thing I would say is recognize how much luck is involved, right? So give yourself a break if things don't work out. And if you're successful, know that there's a lot of luck involved. You can't control every variable, right? So you can work harder than anybody else, and you can hire smarter, and you can do better with your investors, you can have a better idea. But most of the most successful entrepreneurs I know, even the big ones, have said, I never imagined that the company was going to be this big. For example, like you asked Mark Zuckerberg in 2000 or Bill Gates in 1990, like they had no idea that their companies were going to be as big as they did, and lots of lucky bounces along the way. I mean, Amazon almost went out of business a few times. I think that, one, don't do it unless you have to. Two, recognize the role that sort of luck plays. And three is, yeah, the give yourself a break, I think is actually one that I need to remind myself of more too. It's the really good ones. I had a third too on the tip of my tongue. Don't do it if you can't do it. Give yourself a break and recognize the role of luck. What else would I tell you? Yeah, I think those are like all the other stuff's kind of obvious. But there's no way to learn how to do it unless you get into it.
And just one last thing, how do you maintain a work-life balance being the CEO of ClassPass and Mindbody and being part of so many things, having lots of investments? How do you maintain that work-life balance?
You don't is the honest answer. And I don't think any successful entrepreneur has figured that one out. What I do is I prioritize and make room for the things that matter, and I make conscious sacrifices. One of my bosses told me, you have to choose between your job success uh, your family and your friends, and you can choose two out of three, and you can't choose three.
Hmm.
That seems a little crude, but I think it does. I have good friendships and stuff, but I chose to kind of prioritize my job and my family over the last 10 years, and I have great relationships and friends, but I don't spend as much time on those as I'd like to, and that they'd like me to. So, I think this notion of balance is true, but given how much of your luck or how much of your success as an entrepreneur is exogenous or luck, and given that the only thing you can really control is how hard you work at it, and given you need to be a little messed up in the head to even try, most entrepreneurs end up leaning into working really hard because that maximizes their chances of success. And so I think it's dangerous to sort of aspire to be able to have perfect balance between your hobbies, your family, your job, and your friendships and relationships. And so, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, be prepared to sacrifice. And all I can say is what I do is don't make a non-decision. Make sure that you're conscious about what your priorities are and make time for them. And for me, that's one workout a day. Hopefully I'm there 5 days a week. I try to do some fun, either skiing or fly fishing for myself once a weekend, maybe, or every other weekend. And my wife and my daughter get a bunch of my time and my nuclear family, and pretty much the rest goes to my work. I'm always there if a friend needs me for a phone call. I try to be good about, planning cool vacations to see those friends.
Well, Fritz, I hope you enjoy the snow because I know it's going to be a lot of there's it's snowing right now here in Missoula, and I hope the weekend brings a good ski trip because I know it's been a pretty dry season so far. But really appreciate your time and yeah, thank you so much for being a guest, Fritz.
Thanks so much.